Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. If you are returning, you know the drill by now, but if you are new here, this daily show goes year by year through all 250 years of American history, telling a linear story. We began on July 4th of 2025, and the show will end on July 4th of 2026. Now let's get into the episode. In this year of relative calm, we have two statements to read in full from the president, as well as providing an update on relations with the Indians in various tribes. There are a few major signings we'll look into this year, as well as covering the fallout from the Whiskey Rebellion. Welcome to 1795 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and President Washington issues a Thanksgiving proclamation. When we review the calamities which afflict so many other nations, the present condition of the United States affords much matter of consolation and satisfaction. Our exemption hitherto from foreign war, an increasing prospect of the continuance of that exemption, the great degree of internal tranquility we have enjoyed, the recent confirmation of that tranquility by the suppression of an insurrection which so wantonly threatened it, the happy course of our public affairs in general, the unexampled prosperity of all classes of our citizens, are circumstances which peculiarly mark our situation with indications of the divine beneficence towards us. In such a state of things, it is in a special manner our duty as a people, with devout reverence and affectionate gratitude, to acknowledge our many and great obligations to Almighty God, and to implore Him to continue and confirm the blessings we experience. Deeply penetrated with this sentiment, I, George Washington, President of the United States, do recommend to all religious societies and denominations, and to all persons whomsoever within the United States, to set apart and observe Thursday the 19th day of February next as a day of public thanksgiving and prayer, and on that day to meet together and render their sincere and hearty thanks to the great ruler of nations for the manifold and signal mercies which distinguish our lot as a nation, particularly for the possession of constitutions of government which unite and by their union establish liberty with order, for the preservation of our peace, foreign and domestic, for the sensible control which has been given to a spirit of disorder in the suppression of the late insurrection, and generally for the prosperous course of our affairs, public and private, and at the same time humbly and fervently to beseech the kind author of these blessings graciously to prolong them to us, to imprint on our hearts a deep and solemn sense of our obligations to Him for them, to teach us rightly to estimate their immense value, to preserve us from the arrogance of prosperity and from hazarding the advantages we enjoy by delusive pursuits, to dispose us to merit the continuance of His favors by not abusing them, by our gratitude for them, and by a correspondent conduct as citizens and as men, to render this country more and more a safe and propitious asylum for the unfortunate of other countries, to extend among us true and useful knowledge, to diffuse and establish habits of sobriety, order, morality, and piety, and finally to impart all the blessings we possess or ask for ourselves to the whole family of mankind. Timothy Pickering is appointed as the interim Secretary of War on the 2nd, replacing Henry Knox, who retired last year. Pickering boasts an impressive record, and until now was serving under Knox as the Indian Commissioner, signing various treaties with Indian tribes on behalf of the United States, as well as serving as Postmaster General. On January 6th, the U.S. Circuit Court formally convenes under Supreme Court Justice William Patterson to begin trying the risky rebels indicted for treason and other offenses. In total, 24 defendants stand accused, ranging from small farmers to local militia leaders, all of whom had defied the excise tax on distilled spirits and in some cases attacked federal officers. After weeks of testimony and argument, the jury convicts only two men, John Mitchell and Philip Weigel, of levying war against the United States, the definition of treason under the Constitution. Sentencing is deferred while President Washington weighs the consequences of imposing the death penalty. On January 7th, in Georgia, the state legislature meets in Augusta and enacts a measure that will later become infamous. They authorize the sale of almost 35 million acres of western land stretching into what will become Alabama and Mississippi to 4 private land companies at bargain prices. This area, known collectively as the Yazoo lands, sells for roughly 1.5 cents per acre, a sum that immediately draws suspicion. Lawmakers that support the sale argue that Georgia lacks the resources to survey, defend, and populate these distant tracts of land, and that selling them to investors will settle the frontier faster and generate more revenue. Rumors spread, however, that many legislators have been bribed or granted shares in the land companies in exchange for their votes. Citizens protest in town meetings and print bitter denunciations in pamphlets, but despite the growing public backlash, the legislature presses ahead. While these early rumblings of discontent with the sale don't reach too far beyond local discussions for now, I mention it as in the coming years the controversy will entangle Congress, the Supreme Court, and even future presidents as the land buyers and eager settlers clash over the legitimacy of the transaction. On January 31st, Alexander Hamilton resigns as the Secretary of the Treasury. Before leaving, however, Hamilton makes one last official address to Congress in his Report on a Plan for the Further Support of Public Credit. In the 25,000-word report, he reaffirms the merit and success of his earlier financial policies, funding the national debt at par, assuming state debts, establishing excise and tariff revenues, and creating a national bank, asserting they had made the U.S. credit prosperous beyond all expectations. He then outlines the current and continuing revenue sources and recommends continuing methods to redeem the public debt and service interest, using them to maintain a stable nation. He suggests a series of adjustments to the public credit system, refinements with the end goal of being debt-free. All in all, in this concluding appeal, Hamilton argues that public credit and debt, as well as its well-managed, is an essential tool for national defense, economic growth, and personal prosperity. He asserts that it is not a threat to liberty or stability, but that unchecked spending could ruin the United States' reputation with foreign nations and bring hardships to citizens across the country. On February 11th, General Anthony Wayne, still stationed in Fort Greenville in the Northwest Territory, signs a basic peace agreement ending the hostilities with Blue Jacket with promises of a formal treaty in the summer. On the 29th, Congress passes a new Naturalization Act, which replaces and repeals the Naturalization Act of 1790. Notable changes include increasing the requirement of residency from 2 to 5 years, introducing a mandatory declaration of intent requiring the applicant to state at least 3 years before final admission their intent to become a U.S. citizen and to renounce their former allegiances, clarifies that children born abroad to U.S. citizens shall be considered as citizens, saying that no person who has been legally convicted of having joined the Army of Great Britain during the late war shall be admitted as aforesaid without the consent of the legislature of the state in which such person was prescribed, establishes that naturalization may be voided if obtained fraudulently, and requires renunciation of any title or order of nobility. Like the 1790 Act, this new act states that citizenship may only be extended to free white persons. The 11th Amendment to the United States Constitution is ratified on February 7th, having met the requirement of approval of 12 states. North Carolina finally pushing it over that line. Speaking of North Carolina, on February 8th, the first U.S. state university opens, the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. On May 1st, the 15-star and stripe flag becomes the official flag of the United States, following Congress' earlier approval of the design. When you think of signers of the Declaration, the first name that comes to your mind may not be Josiah Bartlett. Bartlett grew up in Amesbury, Massachusetts, and received some formal education from the local schoolmaster, learning Greek and Latin under the tutelage of a relative, Reverend Dr. John Webster. When he was 16, Bartlett began the study of medicine in the office of Dr. James Ordway, who was a practical man with little scientific background. Bartlett read through both the libraries of Dr. Ordway and neighboring towns to supplement his medical knowledge, but since medical books were hard to come by, he also developed a fondness for books on history and mathematics. At 21, he moved 10 miles north to Kingston, New Hampshire, and began to practice medicine. He arrived there with only his clothes, about $30, a small horse, a small bill of medicine, and a pocket case of surgical and dental instruments. Here, Bartlett found an ample opportunity for improvement, both from his conversations with the Reverend with whom he boarded and from the Reverend's library, which Bartlett used extensively. As his reputation grew, he was elected town selectman in 1757, where he earned the respect and trust of his fellow citizens, and was chosen to represent Kingston in the New Hampshire Provincial Assembly in 65. From the outset, he supported colonial interests, but was often in the minority when their interests were threatened, which often put him at odds with the positions of the royal governor. During this time, Bartlett raised the 7th Militia Regiment and was appointed by the governor to serve as the liaison between the Provincial Assembly and the governor during the Stamp Act controversy. By 74, Bartlett had become an active patriot and a firm supporter of colonial interests. He was one of 2 delegates chosen to represent New Hampshire in the First Continental Congress, but was unable to accept when his home was burned down after ignoring threats from loyalists that he must stop his patriot support. In 76, Bartlett was again chosen as a delegate to the Continental Congress, and here he was among the most active delegates, serving on committees dealing with secret correspondence, marine affairs, medicine, clothing, and the qualifications of Army officers. In early February, he wrote, "The time is now at hand when we shall see whether America has virtue enough to be free or not." By June, after the Congress had debated and tabled Lee's resolution for independence, and before the vote, Bartlett was appointed by Congress to represent New Hampshire on the Committee for the Articles of Confederation. He wrote to his cousin-turned-wife, Mary, "May God grant us wisdom to form a happy constitution, as the happiness of America to all future generations depends on it." He was the second man to sign the approved declaration in August, following behind John Hancock. In the next year, he was absent from Congress as he joined General Stark in Vermont to furnish the New Hampshire troops and treat the wounded. Bartlett was the first to vote for the Articles of Confederation in 77 and the first to sign them. Despite his lack of legal training, he served as judge of the Common Pleas from 79 to 82, before becoming an Associate Justice of the New Hampshire Superior Court and was named Chief Justice of the court in 88. Also in 88, Bartlett was appointed a delegate to the New Hampshire State Convention, which was called to consider ratification of the new Constitution. He was a strong advocate for its adoption, and it eventually passed 47-37. The next year, he was elected to the Senate, but declined to serve, and in 90 was elected to be the chief executive of New Hampshire. He served for 4 years, the first 2 as president and the next 2 as governor, and served as an elector in 92, voting for George Washington's re-election. Last year, Bartlett retired, saying, "I now find myself so far advanced in life that it will be expedient for me, at the close of the session, to retire from the cares and fatigues of public business to the repose of a private life, with the grateful sense of the repeated marks of trust and confidence that my fellow citizens have reposed in me, and with my best wishes for the future peace and prosperity of the state." Now, on May 19th, Josiah Bartlett passes away. The inscription on his grave reads, "This monument is erected over the sacred relics of His Excellency Josiah Bartlett, Esquire, late Governor of New Hampshire, who died May 19, 1795, in the 65th year of his age." On June 8th, George Washington submits the treaty signed at the end of last year with Britain to the United States Senate for ratification. The Senate, meeting in executive session and under strict secrecy, debates the treaty from the 8th to the 24th, narrowly approving the treaty by a vote of 20-10, the exact 2/3 majority required under the Constitution. However, the Senate adds a crucial condition, that President Washington suspends Article 12, which limits U.S. ships to no more than 70 tons when trading in the British West Indies, and seek a better arrangement. Washington accepts the Senate's advice and delays signing, but as news of the treaty leaks, citizens burn effigies of Jay, and denunciations fill the editorial pages. The American press undergoes a transformation, emerging as a powerful partisan force shaping national opinion. Throughout the summer, newspapers such as the Aurora and the Gazette of the United States expand their circulation and intensify their rhetoric. The Aurora accuses Federalists of betraying the Revolution by submitting to British influence, while the Gazette insists that Republicans are undermining the rule of law and endangering American commerce. As rumors swirl that the Senate is considering ratification in secret, printers across the country publish leaked extracts and essays denouncing the treaty as the death warrant of American sovereignty. In the Independent Chronicle, critics label it a shameful surrender of American honor. The press is becoming the main channel through which ordinary citizens engage in political life, with broadsides, pamphlets, and editorials sold and reprinted from Boston to Savannah. For the first time in this young republic's history, public opinion, which is both influential on and shaped by a partisan media, begins to drive and constrain policy on a national scale. A Pandora's box that never truly closes. On July 10th, Washington issues pardons for both of the men convicted for their part in the Whiskey Rebellion, declaring that, while their conduct was atrocious, the principles of clemency and reconciliation ought to guide the nation forward. He states that mercy, following a demonstration of the government's authority, will better secure public peace than punishment. The remaining defendants either are acquitted or released for lack of evidence, and quickly, newspapers begin relaying the information, some praising Washington's measured hand, others insisting he has been too lenient. Despite the extremes on either side, for many Americans, these trials confirm that the new federal government possesses both the strength to enforce its laws and the forbearance to forgive. Heading back to General Wayne at Fort Greenville, the formal treaty discussions are commenced and delegates from at least 12 tribes attend as details on borders and concessions are negotiated. The Treaty of Greenville is signed between the Western Confederacy and the United States on August 3rd, effectively ending the Northwest Indian War. The United States agrees to make annuity payments of $20,000 a year, and both sides agree to a termination of hostilities and an exchange of prisoners. Little Turtle authorizes a redefinition of the border between the United States and Indian lands, and by the terms of the treaty, the Indian Confederation cedes all lands east and south of a boundary that begins at the mouth of the Cuyahoga River and extends south to Fort Lawrence, and then west to Fort Recovery. The boundary then continues southwest to the point at which the Kentucky River empties into the Ohio River. In addition, the United States is granted strategically significant parcels of land to the north and west of this line for the establishment of trade and defense. After the signing of the treaty, Little Turtle advocates cooperation with the United States, but he is roundly criticized by the Shawnee chief, who states that the so-called peace chiefs have given away land that they do not own. It's always difficult to describe these geographic changes using only words, and especially so without modern landmarks, so to see a map of the land ceded, visit our X today. Back in Philadelphia, despite the ongoing controversy over Jay's treaty, Washington remains firm, writing Hamilton, "I am satisfied that the treaty, however imperfect, is preferable to war, which would bring far greater hazards." And in a message to the Senate on August 14th, he confirms that he has signed the treaty, excluding the contested article, and forwards the revised version to the British government, which soon approves it. As we'll see next year, the people aren't the only ones up in arms over the treaty, and it will become the subject of a precedent-setting clash between the legislative and executive branches. For years now, the United States has faced challenges with Barbary pirates, particularly from Algiers, who prey on American merchant ships in the Mediterranean. Looking to end these hostilities, on September 5th, the United States signs a treaty with the Dey of Algiers, pledging upfront payment of $642,500 and an annual payment of $23,000 to prevent piracy against American ships as they conduct trade. On October 27th, Thomas Pinckney, who earlier in the year was sent to Spain, signs a treaty of friendship, limits, and navigation with Spain on behalf of the United States. Article 2 establishes the 31st parallel as the boundary, as originally claimed by the U.S. Article 4 opens the entire Mississippi River to American navigation. Article 22 provides that Americans may deposit goods at New Orleans for a term of 3 years without paying duties, and Spain agrees to either extend that right or provide an equivalent establishment on the banks of said river. Now, December, in Kentucky, the state legislature appropriates funds for the construction and improvement of roads navigable by wagons, addressing the problem of existing paths that are plagued by muddy washes and tree stumps that hinder easy travel. This marks the first time Kentucky's state government directly funds road building, a departure from earlier practices where roads generally are made informally and are maintained locally through statute labor or community efforts. The funded improvements on the wagon road from Crab Orchard towards Cumberland Gap, which is a vital frontier route and part of the famed Wilderness Road, is overseen by appointed supervisors to ensure the work meets the needs of increasing settler traffic as more and more head south to seek cheaper land and more favorable growing conditions. As we get to the end of the year, we'll listen to George Washington's State of the Union address, which he delivers on December 8th, and he effectively sums up, well, the State of the Union, so let's listen in.
Fellow citizens of the Senate and House of Representatives, I trust I do not deceive myself when I indulge the persuasion that I have never met you at any period when more than at the present the situation of our public affairs has afforded just cause for mutual congratulation, and for inviting you to join with me in profound gratitude to the Author of all good for the numerous and extraordinary blessings we enjoy. The termination of the long, expensive, and distressing war in which we have been engaged with certain Indians northwest of the Ohio is placed in the option of the United States by a treaty which the commander of our army has concluded provisionally with the hostile tribes in that region. In the adjustment of the terms, the satisfaction of the Indians was deemed worthy no less of the policy than of the liberality of the United States as the necessary basis of durable tranquility. The object, it is believed, has been fully attained. The articles agreed upon will immediately be laid before the Senate for consideration. The Creek and Cherokee Indians, who alone of the southern tribes had annoyed our frontiers, have lately confirmed their pre-existing treaties with us, and were giving evidence of a sincere disposition to carry them into effect by the surrender of the prisoners and property they had taken. But we have to lament that the fair prospect in this quarter has been once more clouded by wanton murders which some citizens of Georgia are represented to have recently perpetrated on hunting parties of the Creeks, which they have again subjected that frontier to disquietude and danger, which will be productive of further expense and may occasion more effusion of blood. Measures are pursuing to prevent or mitigate the usual consequences of such outrages, and with the hope of their succeeding to at least avert general hostility. A letter from the Emperor of Morocco announces to me his recognition of our treaty made with his father, the late Emperor, and consequently the continuance of peace with that power. With particular satisfaction, I add that information has been received from an agent deputed to our part to Algiers, importing that the terms of the treaty with the Dey and Regency of that country had been adjusted in such a manner as to authorize the expectation of a speedy peace and the restoration of our unfortunate fellow citizens from a grievous captivity. The latest advices from our envoy at the court of Madrid give, moreover, the pleasing information that he has the assurances of a speedy and satisfactory conclusion of his negotiation. While the event, depending upon unadjusted particulars, cannot be regarded as ascertained, it is agreeable to cherish the expectation of an issue which, securing amicably very essential interests of the United States, will at the same time lay the foundation of lasting harmony with a power whose friendship we have uniformly and sincerely desired to cultivate. Though not before officially disclosed to the House of Representatives, you, gentlemen, are all apprised that a treaty of amity, commerce, and navigation has been negotiated with Great Britain, and that the Senate have advised and consented to its ratification upon a condition which excerpts part of one article. Agreeably thereto, and to the best judgment I was able to form of the public interest after full and mature deliberation, I have added my sanction. The result on the part of His Britannic Majesty is unknown. When received, the subject will without delay be placed before Congress. This interesting summary of our affairs with regards to the foreign powers, between whom the United States controversies have subsisted, and with regard to those of our Indian neighbors with whom we have been in a state of enmity or misunderstanding, opens a wide field for consoling and gratifying reflections. If, by prudence and moderation on every side, the extinguishment of all causes of external discord which have heretofore menaced our tranquillity, on terms compatible with our national rights and honor, shall be the happy result, how firm and how precious a foundation will have been laid for accelerating, maturing, and establishing the prosperity of our country. Contemplating the internal situation as well as the external relations of the United States, we discover equal cause for contentment and satisfaction. While many of the nations of Europe, with their American dependencies, have been involved in a contest unusually bloody, exhausting, and calamitous, in which the evils of foreign war have been aggravated by domestic convulsion and insurrection, in which many of the arts most useful to society have been exposed to discouragement and decay, in which scarcity of subsistence has embittered other sufferings, while even the anticipations of a return of the blessings of peace and repose are alloyed by the sense of heavy and accumulating burdens which press upon all the departments of industry and threaten to clog the future springs of government, our favored country, happy in striking contrast, has enjoyed tranquillity, a tranquillity the more satisfactory because maintained at the expense of no duty. Faithful to ourselves, we have violated no obligation to others. Our agriculture, commerce, and manufacturers prosper beyond former example. The molestations of our trade, to prevent a continuance of which, however, very pointed remonstrances have been made, being overbalanced by the aggregate benefits which it derives from a neutral position. Our population advances with a celerity which, exceeding the most sanguine calculations, proportionally augments our strength and resources, and guarantees our future security. Every part of the Union displays indications of rapid and various improvement, and with burdens so slight as scarcely to be perceived, with resources fully adequate to our present exigencies, and with governments founded on the genuine principles of rational liberty and with mild and wholesome laws, is it too much to say that our country exhibits a spectacle of national happiness never surpassed, if ever before equaled? Placed in a situation every way so auspicious, motives of commanding force impel us, with sincere acknowledgment to Heaven and pure love of our country, to unite our efforts to preserve, prolong, and improve our immense advantages. To cooperate with you in this desirable work is a fervent and favorite wish of my heart. It is a valuable ingredient in the general estimate of our welfare that the part of our country which was lately the scene of disorder and insurrection now enjoys the blessings of quiet and order. The misled have abandoned their errors and pay the respect to our Constitution and laws which is due from good citizens to the public authorities of the society. These circumstances have included me to pardon generally the offenders here referred to, and to extend forgiveness to those who have been adjudged to capital punishment. For though I shall always think it a sacred duty to exercise with firmness and energy the constitutional powers with which I am vested, yet it appears to me no less consistent with the public good than it is with my personal feelings to mingle in the operations of government every degree of moderation and tenderness which the national justice, dignity, and safety may permit. Gentlemen, among the objects which will claim your attention in the course of the session, a review of our military establishment is not the least important. It is called for by the events which have changed, and which may be expected to still further change, the relative situation of our frontiers. In this review, you will doubtless allow due weight to the considerations that the questions between us and certain foreign powers are not yet fully adjusted, that the war in Europe is not yet terminated, and that our western posts, when recovered, will demand provision for garrisoning and securing them. A statement of our present military force will be laid before you by the Department of War. With the review of our army establishment is naturally connected that of the militia. It will merit inquiry what imperfections in the existing plan further experience may have unfolded. The subject is of so much moment in my estimation as to excite a constant solicitude that the consideration of it may be renewed until the greatest attainable perfection shall be accomplished. Time is wearing away some advantages for forwarding the object, while none better deserves the persevering attention of the public councils. While we indulge the satisfaction which the actual condition of our western borders so well authorizes, it is necessary that we should not lose sight of an important truth which continually receives new confirmations, namely, that the provisions heretofore made with a view to the protection of the Indians from the violences of the lawless part of our frontier inhabitants are insufficient. It is demonstrated that these violences can now be perpetuated with impunity. It can need no argument to prove that unless the murdering of Indians can be restrained by bringing the murderers to condign punishment, all the exertions of the government to prevent destructive retaliation by the Indians will prove fruitless, and all our present agreeable prospects illusory. The frequent destruction of innocent women and children, who are chiefly the victims of retaliation, must continue to shock humanity, and an enormous expense to drain the treasury of the Union. To enforce upon the Indians the observance of justice, it is indispensable that there shall be competent means of rendering justice to them. If this means can be devised by the wisdom of Congress, and especially if there can be added an adequate provision for supplying the necessities of the Indians on reasonable terms, a measure the mention of which I more readily repeat, as in all the conferences with them they urge it with solicitude, I should not hesitate to entertain a strong hope of rendering our tranquillity permanent. I add with pleasure that the probability even of their civilization is not diminished by the experiments which have thus far been made under the auspices of government. The accomplishment of this work, if practicable, will reflect undecaying luster on our national character and administer the most grateful consolations that virtuous minds can know. Gentlemen of the House of Representatives, the state of our revenue, with the sums which have been borrowed and reimbursed pursuant to the different acts of Congress, will be submitted from the proper department, together with an estimate of the appropriations necessary to be made for the service of the ensuing year. Whether measures may not be advisable to reinforce the provision of the redemption of the public debt will naturally engage your examination. Congress have demonstrated their sense to be, and it were superfluous to repeat mine, that whatsoever will tend to accelerate the honorable extinction of our public debt accords as much with the true interest of our country as with the general sense of our constituents. Gentlemen of the Senate and the House of Representatives, the statements which will be laid before you, relative to the Mint, will show the situation of that institution and the necessity of some further legislative provisions for carrying the business of it more completely into effect, and for checking abuses which appear to be arising in particular quarters. The progress in providing materials for the frigates and in building them, the state of fortification of our harbors, the measures which have been pursued for obtaining proper sites for arsenals and for replenishing our magazines with military stores, and the steps which have been taken toward the execution of the law for opening a trade with the Indians will likewise be presented. Temperate discussion of the important subjects which may arise in the course of the session, and mutual forbearance where there is a difference of opinion, are too obvious and necessary for the peace, happiness, and welfare of our country to need any recommendation of mine.
Well, that's it for this year. New treaties signed, more land claimed, and, for a rare moment, peace for the United States of America. Outside of the particularly well-documented events such as political changes and legislation, many records from the time are printed on cheap paper that disintegrates easily, and there was a series of fires that destroyed many artifacts that had existed. So records from this time are especially hard to come by. We do our best to present a complete picture, but for now we are focusing on the legislation and politics of a nation as that's what's best recorded. I hope you've been enjoying the show. Today marks 20 episodes down and 230 to go. Leave a rating or subscribe to the show if possible on the platform you're listening on. This has been Our Story, 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.